Shut the lights down in the city, say the system's on the ropes, while the same hands that broke it hold your paycheck and your hopes. They'll sell your sweat for silver, call your sacrifice relief, but every drop of truth we bleed writes another line of belief. Freedom isn't free, it's carved in blood and fire and stone. That's the price of stand tall when they tell you to kneel and go home. They can lock up every promise, tax the air we breathe, but they'll never change the hearts of those who still believe. 'Cause freedom isn't free. They preach peace from marble towers while they fence off your front yard. They wave a flag made out of rules and call obedience smart. They'll brand your voice as danger, they'll mock your faith as greed, but freedom don't need permission, it just needs men who bleed. Freedom isn't free, it's carved in blood and fire and stone. It's the price of standing tall when they tell you kneel and go home. They can lock up every promise, tax the air we breathe, but they'll never change the hearts of those who still believe. 'Cause freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free, it's written in red on history's page, a warning to the tyrants and the cowards of the age. They can bury us in silence, but the truth still screams. Freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
Come gather round the footlights, lads, and hear the old boards groan. A tale of ink and iron will, of voices overblown. From mics and scripts to painted sails, we've traded shore for sea. The players will man the rigging soon. Aye, your hands! shadowed silver grin to Jim with compass true. We speak the words, we wear the scars, we make the old world new. No gold without the work behind, no legend without sweat. A stage, a ship, a single breath. The course is not set yet. We players sail, we players sail, we players sail soon. All hands to KLRN Radio, setting sail for Treasure Island, March 2026.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Celebrity designer Jeff Lewis is back with Hollywood House Lift.
I'm excited to be working with new clients.
I'm not getting rid of that.
I hope I never see you both again.
An all-new season.
Those have to go. That has to go.
From oh, wow,
It's been an actual nightmare.
to oh, wow.
This is such an upgrade.
With celebrities like Josh Duhamel, Christina Ricci, and Gina Rodriguez.
Dazzle me, Jeff.
It looks like Chuck E. Cheese.
Stream an all-new season of Hollywood House Lift with Jeff Lewis, now streaming on Freevee.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
He's got the crowd. Heartland Radio, raw and real. Tune in, speak up, and feel what we feel. He's breaking down the noise, cutting through the lies, shining light where the shadow hides. With guests in the mix and callers on cue, he's a voice for the many, not the few. Well, grab your coffee, raise that flag, stand your ground.
And good Wednesday afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into the Hump Day / Chat Lives Matter Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. Want to give a quick shout out to Denny hanging out in the chat, and it looks like Jack's over in YouTube land. I know YouTube has a lot of libs, so you might not want to stay long. It's up to you. Up to you. Because anyway. All right, so we got plenty of stuff to talk about today. Of course, what we have on the screen right now is
which means
our
that they have
return
2
to
hours in which they can try to launch
like
the
outside of
SLS,
low Earth
or the
orbit.
Space Launch System
Seems
rocket, and Orion
trust me,
spacecraft
I do a
that will send
conspiracy-tainment show
NASA astronauts
twice a week
Reed Wiseman,
for a reason, because I've always found it a
Victor
little
Glover,
weird that after we
Christina
made it to the
Cook,
moon in the 60s, we never
and Canadian
went
Space
back.
Agency astronaut
Apparently
Jeremy
that's changing
Hansen
today as long
on
as
a
the launch
10-day
happens.
mission around the moon
So
and back.
we've got that going on. There's Supreme Court
Now, the
arguments
launch team is
going on.
currently in the
It's
process
also
of
April
loading
Fool's Day,
cryogenic
which
or
is
super
the one
cold
day that
liquid
everybody believes
propellant
everything they
onto
read on
the
that
SLS
actually takes a
rocket.
second to fact check
The
everything
propellants
they
that
see
are
on the
used
internet
to
and usually
power
ignores
SLS are
fact
liquid
checking.
hydrogen and liquid oxygen.
55 other what?
We are currently in our
355 days,
replenish phase
364
for both
days of the
liquid
year.
hydrogen
Damn, flip the numbers
tanks
around.
on the 2
There's
phases
not
of the
supposed to
rocket,
be
on the
any
2
math on
stages of the
Wednesdays.
rocket.
Anyway, so we're
That is
here,
both the
we're
core
live.
stage
Like I
and
said,
the
plenty of
interim
things to talk
cryogenic
about.
propulsion stage.
I have been out for a few days. The crud round 11T11 hit me again last week, and in between the weather changes and the crud, it was bad. I was hobbling even more than I normally do. Barely have had a voice. Trying to do this damn thing today anyway, because there's too much going on to not try to do a show. So we're here, we're live, and of course we have to talk about the whole Supreme Court thing that's happening right now. I was going to try to pull some of the audio up, but for some reason C-SPAN keeps buffering on me, so I'm going to try one more time just to see if I can make it work, since apparently it's still happening, just so we can actually kind of listen in for at least a couple minutes. I don't think I'm going to stay with it long. I, like you, have been listening to it probably pretty much all day anyway, so as soon as it started, but for some reason the C-SPAN website's being a little weird, so bear with me for just a second. And of course it's not giving me the option to skip the ad. Go figure. All right, there we go. Okay, so let me bring up the sound first. And then, hang on. I'll drop the volume on that one because it's the one that's currently on the feed. And we go over here. Sorry. I am talking out loud. And see, it's doing it to me again. It just stopped again. I don't know what's going on with it. It keeps saying that it's ending, but it keeps reloading. All right, anyway, so I guess I won't be putting that on the screen because I just tried and it keeps stopping on me. So anyway, so we're not going to do that. So let's get into this anyway. So there is a birthright citizenship fight, and it's happening in the Supreme Court today, in case you've missed it. So under the microscope is the 14th Amendment's subject to the jurisdiction thereof line. So here's what we're talking about today so far. So this may be one of the biggest Supreme Court fights of this administration, whether the president can, by executive order, redefine who is an American citizen at birth. Now, that of course is the ACLU's position, is that Donald Trump on the fly is redefining who is an American citizen with the stroke of a pen. I don't really think that that's the case, though. The case itself is Trump v. Barbara, and the line at the center of the fight is just 5 words from the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That matters because the order at issue says children born in the United States would not automatically be citizens if their parents were here legally or only temporarily and were not U.S. citizens or green card holders. Lower courts blocked it so far. Now the Supreme Court has to decide whether that order is a lawful reading of the Constitution or an attempt to rewrite it. Of course, that. So yes, this is historic in another way, too. According to reporting and the court's coverage today, Donald Trump apparently became the first sitting president to attend a Supreme Court oral argument, which has the left in a major tizzy, by the way. Interestingly enough, even though there's always been an available seat for a president to sit in on the hearings, it's never been used until now. So the left, of course, even former righties like Joel Walsh is like, see, we told you, he's a mobster. He's going there to try to intimidate the courts. Dude, those justices aren't afraid of him. I'm not necessarily saying whether they should or shouldn't be, but I know for a fact that they're not. But of course, that's their whole argument is, well, he's going because he wants to intimidate them. So yeah, that is actually pretty historic. Not going to try to pretend that it's not. So, but let's start with the actual text because this whole case lives or dies there. The citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That's the sentence that everyone is fighting over. The administration's argument is that there are two separate requirements. You have to be born here, yes, but you also have to be fully under American political jurisdiction. In the government's merits brief, it argues that children of people here unlawfully or here only temporarily are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in the constitutional sense the government says the framers intended. Now, I have to admit, I agree with that take, and I know I'm not the only one, but I also know that there are a lot of folks who disagree with me because I do firmly believe that under the jurisdiction thereof or subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a very key sentence, and people that are here illegally aren't under any form of jurisdiction other than administrative removal processes. So that means, as far as I'm concerned, any children that are born while they are here and also here illegally shouldn't be considered citizens. And I know that's just a lot of folks, that's a hardline approach. And I know Bruce Springsteen is all about born in the USA, man, and all the other crap. But this is just wrong in my opinion, because I don't think this was ever what the framers intended. The originalist concept behind the 14th Amendment was to make sure that Native people that were here before us couldn't be excluded, and to make sure that slaves that had been recently freed and emancipated and made citizens of the United States, instead of being considered 3/5 of a person, actually had the same rights and privileges that the rest of us do, including their reparations. Because a lot of folks don't want to talk about that today because they want reparations now for things that happened almost 200 years ago. But they were given reparations, 40 acres and a mule, which was no small amount back then, if I'm being honest with you. Now, the problem with this is it's not just going to be about immigration. It's going to be about executive power, and I think this might be where Trump gets in trouble. So the challengers say that this is a dramatic narrowing of a clause that has long been read broadly. Their side argues that if you were born on U.S. soil and not in one of the narrow traditional exceptions, diplomats, hostile occupiers, which, I'm sorry, wouldn't an illegal immigrant technically count as a hostile occupier? Historically, some tribal sovereignty questions, then you are a citizen, period. That broader understanding is the one federal courts have largely followed for more than a century. Doesn't mean it was right. Remember, Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for a long time, and even RBG said it was dumb law and probably wouldn't stand up to scrutiny, and here we are. So, but again, this isn't just about immigration. This is about executive power. And I think, like I said, I think this might be where Trump kind of gets in trouble. Because can a president on his own interpret a constitutional settlement this old and this foundational? Because if the answer is yes, then citizenship becomes less a constitutional birthright and more a policy switch future presidents can toggle depending on ideology. Now, that was a statement put in by my producer. It's not necessarily one that I agree with because I don't think it's something that can be turned on and off with a switch. I think part of what we're trying to do right now is finish closing the loop, because birthright citizenship was intended to be a closed loop that was very specific, and I think the broader interpretation has cheapened it. Now, I think one of the reasons, because everybody talks about the fact that up until now, Congress and the courts have been viewing this very broadly and not with as narrow as an approach as being taken by this administration. But there's also the birthright, the anchor baby boom, the anchor baby industrial complex. I don't really know what to call it, but there's an entire money making industry besides getting people into this country so that they can pop a baby out on U.S. soil. So that, I think, maybe where some of the pushback comes from. But so a federal judge in New Hampshire said this executive order likely violates the 14th Amendment. Another federal judge said it flouts the plain language. Okay, so even as somebody who understands legalese and all of that, the language in our amendments is not plain. If we really want to keep using things like plain language, maybe we should actually have a English translation, a new English translation of our Constitution. But if we did, the leftists would just want to change everything that it means anyway, so I guess it wouldn't matter. So according to the Ninth Circuit panel, they've called the administration's reading strained and novel. Those are not subtle judicial criticisms. That's actually... And the weird thing is the Ninth Circuit's been on Trump's side a lot lately, so them coming out and saying, yeah, this is kind of a novel approach. So then, of course, we have the First Circuit in a unanimous opinion. So the question was not actually a hard one. That court wrote that it may explain why it had been more than a century since any branch of government made such a concerted effort to deny Americans their birthright. That tells you outside the modern mainstream, the lower courts viewed this move. The precedent everybody keeps coming back to, though, is this. The shadow hanging over today's argument is United States v. Wong Kim Ark from 1898. That is the case everybody cites because it is the Supreme Court's clearest statement on birthright citizenship. In that case, the court held that a child born in San Francisco to Chinese parents was, in fact, a U.S. citizen. The key language from Wong Kim Ark is worth reading because it shows why this case is so difficult for the administration. The court said the 14th Amendment excludes only narrow categories, principally children of diplomats and children of enemies in hostile occupation. So according to a summary put out by AP of the opinion, quotes Justice Horace Gray saying that the amendment affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth, that is bedrock language. Now, the administration has been trying to distinguish Wong Kim Ark by emphasizing that Wong's parents were described as having a lawful permanent domicile and residence in the United States. The government's brief leans hard on that word domicile and argues that the precedent should not automatically extend to children of people here unlawfully or temporarily. And that is the crux of the argument that I've been making, is this. If we're talking about citizenship by blood or citizenship by soil, and I'm not using the Latin phrases today because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm talking down to them. But those are the two premises behind citizenship. It is birthright through soil and birthright through blood. So one of the keyest points that I've been making for the longest time is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof is very fine pointed language. If the parents are here legally, meaning that they're on a green card, meaning that they've followed all the legal processes to at least become a participant in this country and haven't just broken the door down, then that changes. That means that those children should have birthright citizenship. But the people that are here legally, that technically don't have the legal right to set up a place to live here, shouldn't have options to access all of our services and everything else, those people, in my opinion, are not covered by the 14th Amendment because they are not subject to our jurisdiction. They are subject to the jurisdiction that they came from because they didn't follow the process to get in here, which means the only thing that they have the right to do is file an administrative appeal and say, this is why I came into the country. Can I stay or do I have to go? But that's why this is also nuanced and so weird and so heavy. And it's kind of why I wanted to get most of it out of the way in the early part of the show, because there's a lot of nerd speak happening in here. Just saying. But this is the administration's best lane to stay in. Not saying that Wong Kim Ark means nothing, but saying it doesn't go as far as the other side claims. The challengers, meanwhile, say that it is slicing the precedent too thin and ignoring the sweep of both the constitutional text and the historical understanding that followed it. So, based on what we're seeing right now, the justices so far including some conservatives, have been pressing the administration pretty hard. Chief Justice John Roberts reportedly told Solicitor General John D. Sauer that the government's theory seemed quirky. According to Reuters, they've also reported that Roberts said, "I'm not quite sure how you can get to that big group from such a tiny and sort of idiosyncratic example." That is a serious warning sign for the government, because Roberts is basically saying the administration may be trying to build a huge constitutional rule out of a few historical, very small, shall we say, tiny exceptions. According to Justice Elena Kagan, you're using some pretty obscure source to get this concept completed, and that gets right to the originalist fight. The administration says history supports it. Kagan's reported response is your history looks cherry-picked and your text doesn't get you there. From Justice Brett Kavanaugh, according to Reuters, he pushed on the government's use of foreign countries as support, saying he understood it as a policy point but didn't necessarily see the legal relevance to constitutional interpretation. That matters, because when a justice says, "I get the policy point," what he often means is, "But policy is not law." And of course, now we have Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She reportedly zeroed in on the Reconstruction era debates and asked in substance what the court should do with evidence that the proponents of the Civil Rights Act and the 14th Amendment said everyone born in the U.S. would be citizens. That's a direct challenge to the administration's history. And there was even a revealing moment involving Justice Neil Gorsuch. According to the Washington Post, Gorsuch pressed Sauer with a question about Native Americans and birthright citizenship, and Sauer answered, "I think so," before Gorsuch dryly replied, "I'll take that as a yes." Even in a snippet form, that exchange suggests government theory may get messy fast when you start testing it at the edges. Now, on the other side, the ACLU attorney Cecilia Wang argued that the American rule is simple and widely understood. Reuters quotes her as saying the following: ask any American what our citizenship rule is, and they will tell you everyone born here is a citizen alike. She also argued that the rule was placed under the 14th Amendment specifically to put it beyond the reach of ordinary political officials. So that's the challengers' political and legal sweet spot. This is not some obscure administrative dispute. This is the definition of American membership. Their argument is that if you let one president narrow citizenship by executive order, then a constitutional guarantee becomes something less constitutional. I, again, disagree, because they are leaning into one specific sentence within that amendment, which is under the jurisdiction thereof. If you have come here legally and you have followed the process, then you are under our jurisdiction. If you have not, then you are under the jurisdiction from whence you came, and therefore you do not have the right to participate here because you have not followed the processes. That, in my opinion, voids out the citizenship for any children that were born here, that were fathered by you or mothered by you because you did not follow the process to come here legally. So I get both sides. I really do. And I think this is going to be very messy before we get an answer. They technically could have an answer later this afternoon. I don't really see that happening, though. I think this will be something that will take a while to sort out, and I, much like the tariffs thing, see this is probably going to be a Solomon kind of splitting the baby kind of thing, as much as that's not really what I want or what I'm hoping for. But hey, I have a Skylar sighting in my chat. I just noticed. I was reading from notes. All right, so we're going to take a quick break because I need to get a sip of water and throw another cough drop in here. But so music break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Somebody answers, day or night, they're already moving. Calm voices, fast hands, doing the work while the rest of the world freezes. From a headset to a truck, from a badge to a door, they don't stop to count the cost. They step in when it matters. It's not about being seen, it's about being there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Before the sirens fade, before the scene is clear, someone's already making sense of the moment. Keeping people alive, keeping things from getting worse. Some run toward danger, some stay behind and hold it together. Different roles, same weight, same promise to show up. When everything's on the line, they're already there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. This is service, this is sacrifice, this is how lives are saved. No spotlight, no applause, just showing up again and again. They're holding the line when the world goes dark. When everything's breaking, they hold their ground. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line. So we raise our voices for the ones who stand. Every voice, every badge, every helping hand. They don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Always standing in the gap for us all. For those who run and for those who hold steady, for those who stand in the gap.
And welcome back into the Wednesday edition, otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day edition, otherwise known as Hump Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. And bit of a tale of woe, just as I get ready to transition into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So I had a first world problem happen to me today. So I realized last night I was out of coffee. I hadn't been feeling good for the last couple of days, so I hadn't really made coffee because I'm like, I don't really need it. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just being a bum. So I realized last night when I was like, okay, I got to start getting around and get ready for work. So I went to go clean out my coffee pot and get everything ready for in the morning so that, I could have coffee when I got up. And I realized I didn't have coffee. So I'm like, okay, no big deal. I'm going to have to do a Walmart order anyway. So I do a Walmart order, get it set, have it come in, bright and early so I can make sure that I've got time to make my coffee and get sipping on it before I got to start doing things like this. And then in true first world fashion, I got everything from Walmart except my coffee. So lucky for me, I have a couple of emergency energy drinks laying around. And if you're wondering why I sound maybe different than I did before the break, it's because I think the one I just drank might finally be starting to kick in. We also have an Andrew sighting. Good morning, sir. How are you? Well, it's still morning for me for like 19 more minutes. I know for those of you that live in the future, you're like, it's not morning for us anymore. Yeah, you guys are almost done with your lunch break, though. So you're about to have to go back to work. Mainly giving you a hard time. Mainly. Just a little bit. All right. So back to this whole 14th Amendment argument because we're not quite done with it yet. So according to the AP, these are not just abstract political stakes either. Research cited in the case says that more than 250,000 babies per year could be affected if the order took effect. Lower courts also warned that some children could be left undocumented or even stateless. I submit to you they're not undocumented or stateless because they still have a state where they originated, where their parents originated from, which is what their parents' jurisdiction is because they didn't follow the process to get here in the first place the right way. So, to be fair here, though, the administration is not arguing out of thin air. According to its brief, the citizenship clause has always contained a meaningful jurisdiction limit, and that subject to the jurisdiction means more than simply being physically present and generally subject to American law. The brief ties that to ideas of allegiance, reciprocal protection, and political jurisdiction. So their claim is not the 14th Amendment means nothing. It's the 14th Amendment has been overread for decades. They also argue that today's immigration realities are radically different from 1868 and that unrestricted birthright citizenship creates incentives for illegal immigration and so-called birth tourism. We talked about that earlier. I just couldn't remember what the hell they were calling it. But yeah, there's this whole birth tourism industry that is making people hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So that is the policy backdrop being used by the current administration. But again, several justices appear to signal today that even if they understand the policy concern, that does not answer the constitutional question. So my takeaway for today is this. If you're the administration, you've probably needed a clean, forceful textual lane and a clearly receptive conservative majority based on the verified reporting that we've seen so far. That is not what seems to be happening here. It actually sounded like multiple justices, including some on the right, were struggling with how the government gets from a handful of narrow historical exceptions to a sweeping new rule covering huge categories of U.S.-born children. However, again, that is the synopsis of everything we've been able to see today so far, but I disagree with that synopsis because, again, subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a very important thing. If you are not here legally, then that brings into question your allegiances. That brings into question all kinds of things that in today's climate, we really need to start being able to address. So I look forward to the court's decision. I don't know how this is going to go, but this is the fight. Not just immigration, not just Trump, not just today's headlines, but whether the meaning of citizenship in the United States is fixed by the Constitution as commonly understood for more than a century, or whether this court is willing to reopen the question. And I think they should reopen the question, if nothing else, because I think we have been basically applying a wide blanket, and there are all kinds of unintended consequences, especially with this birth tourism industry that's been created. And I don't think that's what our founding fathers intended. Now, I could be wrong. And it's not like I haven't been wrong before, but I don't know how this is gonna go. Because so far, even the folks that are usually on his side have been kind of hard on the Solicitor General. And I have to say this, and this is coming from somebody who I know sounds really hoarse today. One of the things that weirds me out about listening to this stuff and only being able to hear their voices and not being able to really see anything other than a still shot, which in today's technological climate, I really don't know why cameras aren't allowed in courts. But what do I know? It reminded me that how much the Solicitor General for the United States today reminded me of a member of the race from V, the original miniseries, just because of how weird his voices sounded. His voice is sounding today. All right, so before we get out of here for hour one, we got to talk about this. Maybe. So Kristi Noem's back in the news, but not for why you might think this time. This is from Jennifer Oliver over at Red State. So the latest Noem scandal raises questions about vetting and potential national security vulnerabilities. The Daily Mail UK has exclusively reported about a new scandal surrounding former Department of Homeland Security Secretary and current Special Envoy to the Shields of America, Kristi Noem. However, the focal point of this report is not Noem herself, but her long-suffering husband, businessman Brian Noem. Kristi Noem's husband is today revealed as a secret crossdresser who dons gigantic fake breasts and pink hot pants to chat with online fetish models. Yeah. So while his wife has operated at the highest echelons of government, handling matters of national security in her recent role as DHS secretary, Brian Noem, age 56, has been dressing up and playing adult entertainers. And paying adult entertainers to talk dirty. The Daily Mail has reviewed hundreds of messages involving 3 women from the bimbofication scene, where porn performers transform themselves into real-life Barbie dolls by pumping colossal amounts of saline into their breasts. Brian has lavished praise on their surgically enhanced bodies, confessed his lust for huge, ridiculous boobs, even made indiscreet remarks about his 34-year marriage. You would have thought this probably should have come out during the vetting process. Attorney Rob Kellner, who has prepared nominees for cabinet-level process, said to NPR, "It's very invasive and all kinds of issues can surface about family members, about children, about an arrest that might have happened in the past. With the increased use of social media and any photographed and videoed peccadillos, even deleted ones, can be discovered. It appears that Brian Noem had no fear of this behavior," which, why would he? Look, I know where I stand on this stuff, but I don't really know why the left is using this as such a gotcha moment. Because I thought this was the new normal. This is what you guys want, right? You want people cross-dressing, and you want people claiming that they're not what they were born as. I thought this was the new normal. I mean, to me, I will tell you that it's deviant behavior, something that should have come out during the vetting process. But, again, in my opinion, the left has absolutely nothing to stand on here, but they're making a big deal about it. So a PayPal account belonging to probably the moniker Jason Jackson sent the women regular deposits, typically between $500 and $1,000. She says he openly admitted to having a wife and family. He'd say, "I love my wife, I want to get better." Then he'd disappear, come back, and start again, the woman added. Over time, the models began to figure out the real identity of their shadowy benefactor. A second woman told the Daily Mail she pocket-dialed Jason and was astonished to hear a voicemail greeting saying, "Noem Insurance, leave a message." A quick Google search pulled up photos of Kristi and Brian Noem. She was completely shocked. Why are you doing this? "I didn't think hot guys did this," the woman said. "He said he didn't care. I thought you should care. Your wife could lose everything that she's ever worked for." But again, why is the left using this as such a cudgel? Because I thought this was their new normal. Why is it only normal when they do it? I'm just asking. Hey. Yeah, I agree, Stephen. That is kind of a scary thing. So I'm going to put this on the screen, and then we'll discuss it for a minute before we take the top of the hour break. Because I do want to get into the Artemis and other stuff happening today. Because we're finally going back to the moon, bitches. So the Supreme Court can't read the Constitution. The Constitution is clear. The attorneys are not even arguing it. I think the Solicitor General's trying to. I don't know. Again, so I know I've been talking about this a lot lately, but everybody's so mad about the dumbing down of Star Trek, especially for the longtime fans like me. I think it's being dumped down for a reason, though. We're slowly becoming the Packlets, y'all. I don't think anybody from our side wants to admit it, but we're slowly becoming the Packlets. Just look at the story I just spent 5 minutes on. The husband of the former Homeland Security Secretary is a cross-dresser sending people $1,000 at a time to talk dirty to him on video calls. Why the left is able to make a big deal about this, I'm not really sure. Why the right's not making a bigger deal about it, not really sure. But here we are. Fun times, fun times. All right, so let's see what other quick trouble we can get into real quick before we take the top of the hour break. Looks like Rubio's back in the news. I don't know if it looks like it's a clip, though, so I guess instead of talking about it, let's do that. So hang on. That way you guys don't have to listen to me talk about it. You can listen to him. And hopefully it doesn't glitch, but I probably just jinxed it. So here we go. Helps if I hit the right button.
Hormuz, those are international waters, right? So anything Iran does to impede commercial traffic is illegal. For all these countries that love to talk about international law, it is a violation of international maritime law to impede the free flow of travel in international waters. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, it's illegal to bomb and hit and attack commercial shipping and sink them. I mean, that's what the Nazis did during World War II in the Atlantic. And that's what they're doing now to ships that from countries they don't like, that are flagged by countries they don't like. These are terroristic acts that they're undertaking. And so the United States gets very little energy through the Straits of Hormuz. Our allies ship out a lot of oil through there, meaning our Gulf allies. And certainly countries in Asia and Europe depend on it. We depend very little on the Straits. So this, if in fact Iran decides to set up a toll, if in fact Iran decides that they're going to illegally control the Straits of Hormuz or decide they're going to try to do that, look, I imagine that'll be the president's call, whether he wants to help. But this is a problem for the world. It's countries around the world should be stepping up and dealing with that and saying that's intolerable. And that's what we've encouraged them to do.
All right, so we haven't talked about the Strait of Hormuz much lately. I think that might be kind of the end game of the administration. Not only hoping to eventually get the Iranian people to rise up and take their government back, but to make sure that we permanently and forever secure the strait. Because he's right, we don't use it much. But countries like Australia have already started to put out calls to their citizens to ration energy because, oil's becoming a premium again. So I think that maybe one of the end games here is to make sure that we permanently open the Strait of Hormuz and keep it that way. I will say this as well, and this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, which is why I'm going to say this and then go to break and, drop it like a grenade and come back. At this point, Operation Epic Fury without regime change is kind of pointless. And I'm going to tell you why I think that, and then we're going to take the break. And it's this. Again, whether you like it or not, you have to go way back to find it. But this actually started with us. This was our fault. We were coming out of World War II. We had just dealt with a huge socialist power going completely insane. We watched Iran go from democracy to basically starting to broach socialism, and then we decided we needed to do something to change that. And everything that happened after that happened because of those steps that we took to remove their duly elected prime minister. So the other side of this equation, though, is this. It may have been something that we set in motion, but the new government of Iran has been at war with us since 1979, whether we wanted to admit it or not. So it is time to fix our mess. And that's why I push back on everybody on the left and even on my side who said he promised us he wasn't going to embroil us into any new wars. Again, this isn't a new war. And in reality, it's a mess that we created way back in the 50s. And it is about time that we did something about it because it's our mess. Now, as far as I'm concerned, once we get all this squared away and we get everything sorted, we should really start looking at something akin to what the Federation has as far as the Prime Directive. if they are not on our level, we need to stop meddling in their lives. Period. Unless or until they make a point to start meddling in ours. I know, that's a very simplistic view, and it's impossible to do. But in a perfect world, it would be how we would deal with things after we clean up our own. But sadly, we do not live in a perfect world. All right, my name is Rick Robinson. This is my show. We've got another hour coming. When we come back, we'll get into some of the stuff about the Artemis launch, maybe a bit of space history, because, you know, I am a nerd, so might as well embrace it today, of all days. But we'll be right back. Don't go too far. Or if you do, please come back. I'll miss you.
Shut the lights down in the city, say the system's on the ropes, while the same hands that broke it hold your paycheck and your hopes. They'll sell your sweat for silver, call your sacrifice relief, but every drop of truth we bleed writes another line of belief. Freedom isn't free, it's carved in blood and fire and stone. It's the price of stand tall when they tell you to kneel and go home. They can lock up every promise, tax the air we breathe, but they'll never change the hearts of those who still believe. Cause freedom isn't free. They preach peace from marble towers while they fence off your front yard. They wave a flag made out of rules and call obedience smart. They'll brand your voice as danger, they'll mock your faith as greed. But freedom don't need permission, it just needs men who bleed. Freedom isn't free, it's carved in blood and fire and stone. It's the price of standing tall when they tell you kneel and go home. They can lock up every promise, tax the air we breathe, but they'll never change the hearts of those who still believe. Cause freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free, it's written in red on history's page. A warning to the tyrants and the cowards of the age. They can bury us in silence, but the truth still screams. Freedom isn't free.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRN Radio. can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at klrnradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRN Radio.
Come gather round the footlights, lads, and hear the old boards groan. A tale of ink and iron will, of voices overblown. From mics and scripts to painted sails, we've traded shore for sea. The players will man the rigging soon. Aye, your hands, follow me. From Long John shadowed silver grin to Jim with compass true. We speak the words, we wear the scars, we make the old world new. No gold without the work behind, no legend without sweat. A stage, a ship, a single breath. The course is not set yet. We players sail, we players sail, we players sail soon. All hands to KLRN Radio, setting sail for Treasure Island, March 2026.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show, where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the cloud.
Uh-oh. Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, right here live on KLRN Radio. Also Hump Day and more vanilla-y Wednesday. Anyway, let's kick it off, shall we? We're going to get back into the Supreme Court stuff because thanks to Steven, I have a hell of a clip. Thank you for that, sir. And then we'll get into Artemis 2.
Rick's got the pulse of liberty. It's the Rick Robinson Show, bold, unafraid. Truth bombs dropping.
All right. Welcome back into the program. Again, it is Wednesday. We are in hour 2, wherever you're watching us from, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, all that jazz, including X. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, sharing, whatever options you have available there. Please and thank you, because it helps us beat the dreaded algorithms. I still think that's why Al Gore started making the joke that he was the father of the internet. I think he was a dad joke that just went horribly wrong, but that's just my opinion. All right, so let's get into this before we change tactics, because this is probably one of the best arguments of the entire thing. So,
well, starting with that theory, you obviously put a lot of weight on subject to.
Let me fix it. All right, now I think I can make it work. Maybe.
Well, starting with that theory, you obviously put a lot of weight on subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But the examples you give to support that strike me as very quirky. You know, children of ambassadors, children of enemies during a hostile invasion, children on warships. And then you expand it to the whole class of illegal aliens are here in the country. I'm not quite sure how you can get to that big group from such tiny and sort of idiosyncratic examples.
There are those sort of narrow exceptions for ambassador of foreign public ships. Tribal Indians is an enormous one that they were very focused on in the debates as well. But what I do is I invite the court to look at the intervening step, which is the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And there they didn't say subject to the jurisdiction thereof. There it says not subject to any foreign power. Now, if you go back to Blackstone and Calvin's case, they say it does not matter if you are subject to any foreign power. If you are born in the king's domains, you have this indefeasible duty of allegiance to the king at any time. So there's a clear repudiation in the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act is this breakwater which makes it very, very clear that they are not thinking about allegiance in the terms of like the British common law. They've adopted the Republican conception of allegiance. So it's from not subject to any foreign power, and then the debates just a couple months later make it very clear that they're recodifying the same conception. They were dissatisfied with the potential ambiguity in the phrase Indians not taxed, and they adopted subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And one of the strongest statements of this is Senator Trumbull's statement that I quoted at the beginning, where he says, he's asked, what does that mean, subject to the jurisdiction thereof? And he says, it means not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means. And this court picked up on that in Elk against Wilkins when it says, it uses, completely subject to the political jurisdiction, not mere regulatory jurisdiction.
What do you?
All right, so I'm going to break this down in as plain of English as I can put it. One of the reasons this becomes an important thing, and this is putting this into today's modern context, just to make it as easy as possible. Let me put this another way for you. So how the Constitution and the 14th Amendment are currently interpreted is this. Someone who is from China can come here, have their baby here, get citizenship here, go home, still have citizenship in China, be raised entirely under the CCP regime, educated there, indoctrinated there, and then eventually come back here and be eligible to run for the president of the United States. If you guys think that was what this amendment was about, or what they intended, then I have a nice bridge I would like to sell you. A couple. And I've got some beachfront property in Arizona, too, while we're at it. Because that makes no sense to me. This is part of what it talks about when they start talking about people that are under certain allegiances, people that are actively our enemies. China may not actively be our enemy, but we've been in a Cold War with China now and an espionage war with China now for decades. And I think that needs to be taken into account. And I think the easiest way to close that door is to simply say, if you haven't come here legally and don't intend to set up as a permanent resident of some sort legally, then your children don't get citizenship here. Because, I mean, if you think about it from that perspective, we dropped a number earlier. I'm going to hang on. I know I have it in my notes. Hang on. So, all right, so let's put this into perspective. Remember, we're talking about more than 250,000 babies per year. How many of those are getting citizenship from countries that actively hate us? And let me clue you in on something. Every country actually hates us. They don't like us. They never have. We have been a means to an end for them because we decided, because we have this insane thing where we have to be loved and we have to be liked. And I know it's part of human nature, but it seems like it is amplified here in America because we think we're the best country ever. And look, for anybody who was educated, and graduated in the 90s at least and before. Yeah, right. Dude, I actually was planning on getting into that today too, because this whole new Japan America Love Fest thing is just kind of interesting, and I know there are a lot of World War II great grandpas rolling over in their graves today, at least on the Japanese side. But I still think it's been amazing to watch. But no, seriously, I mean, back to this for just a second. We're talking about allowing people that want us dead to have the ability to come back and run the country, should they so decide to. And if you don't believe me that could be a possibility, please see what's going on with Ilhan Omar. As far as I'm concerned, she shouldn't even be eligible to run for Congress because she's part of a terroristic, theocratic regime. Even if nobody wants to say that part out loud. All right, so let's get into the Artemis stuff. I'll probably, if we have enough time, I may get into the Japanese stuff at the end. But let's get into the Artemis stuff because it's a good day. So let's talk about this because this feels a little bigger than the usual political knife fight or internet psychosis, which we talk about a lot on this show because we have to. Because as we sit here on Wednesday, April 1st, 2026, not an April Fool's joke, NASA is working the Artemis 2 launch with a targeted launch window opening at 6:24 p.m. Eastern or 5:24 in God's time zone. Now, there's a 2-hour window, so it could actually pop off anytime between 6:24 and 8:24, and they have an 80% chance of success based on that current window. But this is the first crewed Artemis mission ever, a roughly 10-day lunar flyby, and if it goes as planned, 4 astronauts will become the first humans in more than 50 years to head out on a mission around the moon. Now, that matters by itself. And it really does, because for some reason, even though we got there in the 60s, at some point, we stopped going back. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a juxtaposition episode, but I think there are reasons we didn't go back. And I think we might be about to get smacked upside the head with them if what I suspect is the reason we didn't go back is the actual reason we haven't been back up until now. But what really interests me is that Artemis 2 is not just a launch, it is a marker. It's a reminder. It is actually a bit of a national checkpoint. Because if you're old enough, or even enough of a history nerd, hi, or just enough of a science fiction junkie, hi again, you know this story has a lot of layers to it. More than an onion. This is not just about the rocket leaving one pad on one day. This is about the long arc from Sputnik to Explorer 1, to Mercury, to Gemini, to Apollo, to the shuttle, to the ISS, to Voyager, Hubble, and now Webb. And potentially now we're going to go back to the moon. Maybe to a place that America once reached in a blaze of Cold War urgency, and then for a whole bunch of reasons stepped away from it. One of those reasons hasn't really been discussed very openly, but you can find it on our Juxtaposition archives if you really want to. And I think that should be the real conversation for today. Not just, hey, is the rocket going up? But what does this moment mean in the larger history of space exploration? Because there was a time in this country when going into space felt like the future arriving in real time, and there was another time when it started to feel routine. And there was a long stretch where, if we're being honest, we stopped thinking of ourselves as a nation that sent people beyond low Earth orbit. Artemis 2 is a chance to ask whether that era is over. So today, let's take a little bit of walk through history. We're going to walk the road of history together, how we got here, what we built, what we lost, what we kept, and why this mission matters beyond the press release. So why exactly is Artemis 2 a big deal? Well, NASA's own description is pretty straightforward. This is the first crewed flight of the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft, and it is intended to prove the systems needed for future deep space missions. The crew is Reed Weissman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. Not that Jeremy Hansen, just in case there's any confusion. And the mission profile is a lunar flyby, not a landing, but that's because they're testing equipment right now, and they still are working on testing the lunar lander. This is still going to be a big deal, though. The distinction matters because this is not Apollo 11. Nobody's planting a flag tonight. This is a proving run. But remember, they did this with the Apollo program, too. They did low Earth orbit first, then they did extended orbit, then they did let's do a lap. That's why it took until Apollo 11 to plant a flag. This is NASA saying we have tested the hardware without crew. Now we're going to put people on it and send them around the moon. And that may not sound as cinematic to people who grew up on moonwalk footage, but in some ways, it is more important than it sounds because the space business punishes arrogance. Space has a way of reminding human beings that physics doesn't care about your feelings. Much like facts, physics doesn't really care about your feelings. You don't just decide you're back because you made a promo video. You prove it. You prove it in engineering. You prove it in procedure. You prove it in navigation. You prove it in life support. You prove it in communications. You prove it in whether your people can go out, do the mission, and come home alive. That's what is going to be tested tonight. And it is especially significant because according to NASA and current reporting, this is the first crewed mission in the Artemis campaign and the first crewed lunar mission in more than half a century. Just think about that for a second. I'm only 52. About to be 53 next month. But that means for almost my entire lifetime, we have been puttering around in low Earth orbit. For those of you who, like me, grew up watching science fiction shows like Lost in Space, Star Trek, and all the other things, we assume that by now we would be a lot further along than we are. And with the technological explosion that we've had and then kind of a bit of curtailing until AI came on the scene, it's understandable as to why we didn't get as far as we thought we were going to. Partly because we lost some of what it took to be explorers. We started worrying more about safety than exploring. And I'm not telling you whether that's a right answer or wrong answer, or whether it's something that should have happened, shouldn't have happened. I'm just saying that is what happened. We were once cut with much sterner stuff. And that is proven throughout our history because we had people that were willing and able to risk their entire lives to get over here on ships that were barely seaworthy by today's standards, and yet they did it anyway. More than once. Then we had wagon trains all across the country. More than once. Because people had a burning desire to see what was unknown versus what was known. For some reason, we have lost that. And I say that because in my lifetime, we have stopped exploring almost everything. We will send robots to Mars for whatever reason. We'll send robots to the moon for whatever reason. But most of our ocean is still completely unexplored. Most of our solar system, other than by probe, is completely unexplored. And now I've been seeing all these people that are, well, you realize if we send people to Mars, they can't ever come back. Because of how that works and how long it takes and everything else. That it would be nearly impossible for them by the time they acclimate to being on Mars to be able to return home. And that has become a screeching point for a lot of folks. See, we told you it's not safe. But again, I would like to point out that at some point we became wusses. Even here. You know, I talk smack about Australia all the time because they're an entire continent that was basically populated by convicts. And you can see it in some of their rules because you're only allowed to hold somebody for like, I think 7 or 8 hours without charging them there, which is funny when you think about it compared to how long it works usually everywhere else. But at the same time, we used to have this rugged individualism. We used to have this whole idea of, you know, we're Americans and we're going to kick ass and take names and deal with it later. And I think part of what's happening is part of our country is trying to get back to that point, and the other half of it is fighting it by any means necessary. And I don't really get it, because we are pushing our way to a time where we become what we were before, to a point with a lot of improvements. We don't have a lot of the racism that the left wants you to think that we have today. We just have common sense. You know, I've said this before. I am not an Islamophobe. Phobia means an irrational fear. I don't have an irrational fear of Islam. I have a healthy fear of Islam, because Islam doesn't make any sense, even on paper. And it just doesn't. But so for the first time in a long time, there are things that are happening that could be hopeful, should be hopeful, but this comes back to something else that I've talked about on this show and on other shows. This is the 250th birthday of America, happening in just a couple months. There should be flags and bunting and God bless America signs and happy 250th all over this country, and there aren't. You know what we have instead? A bunch of folks protesting about kings, when we don't technically have one. Unless you count the black-robed variety, because they seem to be adjusting their crowns a lot lately. But just back to what we were talking about a second ago, a half a century break is a long-ass pause. So tonight isn't just another technical operation. It is an attempt to resume a chapter that has been closed for a very, very long time. And that raises the next question. How did we get here in the first place? To understand Artemis, you really have to go back to the panic, and I mean that actually, because the modern space age, at least politically, starts with fear. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, and it hit the United States like a psychological hammer. NASA's own historical material makes clear that the launch of Sputnik and then the broader Soviet early lead helped trigger the American response that became the civilian space program. Now, if you're younger, it's hard to explain just how disruptive that moment was. Today, we live in a world full of satellites. We barely think about them. As a matter of fact, most of the time we take them for granted. But in 1957, when the Soviets put that little metal sphere up there, beeping over our heads, Americans didn't hear cool science project. They heard the other side has the technology to reach above us. And in the Cold War context, that did not sound like a museum exhibit. That sounded like vulnerability. And in reality, it actually was. Then came Explorer 1 in 1958, America's first satellite, which also delivered major scientific payoff by helping identify the Van Allen radiation belts. That same period led directly into the creation of NASA. So right from the beginning, space exploration was never one thing. It was science, yes. It was engineering, yes. It was prestige, absolutely. But it was also national morale. It was military adjacent capability. It was technological competition. It was propaganda in the old, blunt, actual sense of the word. It was a statement to the world, we can do this too, and we can do it better. That matters because people sometimes romanticize the early space age as though it was all dreamers staring at the stars. There were, in fact, dreamers. There's no question about that. But there were also strategists, almost said strategists, hawks, bureaucrats, and politicians who understood that space was part of the contest for global leadership. That's not cynical. It's not jaded. That's just the true point. In fact, one of the reasons the early years were so productive is that the country had aligned incentives. The scientists wanted discovery. The engineers wanted the challenge. The military wanted capability that would come only from that type of research. The politicians wanted wins. The public wanted wonder. And this is a powerful combination. And once the machinery started moving, NASA had to answer the next giant question. Can a human being survive out there at all? So this takes us to Mercury. And the predominant question regarding Project Mercury was, can man even go? Project Mercury now looks tiny in hindsight. The capsules look small, the missions were brief, and compared to what came later, it all feels almost primitive. But primitive doesn't mean unimportant. NASA says Mercury flew 6 crewed missions from 1961 to 1963. And the objective was simple, but absolutely essential. Put a human in space, see if he can function, and bring him home. That was the first hurdle. Before you can talk about lunar trajectories and docking procedures and deep space habitation, you have to answer the most basic question imaginable. Does the human body even tolerate this? Can a pilot operate in weightlessness? Can he think clearly? Can he handle re-entry? Can the capsule protect him? Can we track him? Can we retrieve him? Mercury was about that first layer of trust. It was America feeling its way into the void. And there's something that I love personally about Mercury because it still had that feeling of national improvisation. Not sloppy improvisation, not unsafe improvisation, but frontier improvisation. A sense that the country was building the future while simultaneously discovering what that future required. And this is actually outlined in a lot of different documentaries that you'll see, from changes that were made on the fly to the plans for the various rockets from Mercury to Apollo and everywhere else in between. And some of those changes happened so on the fly that there weren't even documentation supporting those changes and why they were done, which is where that whole improvisation thing comes from. So this was also about psychology, though. The Soviets had their own achievements. The race was on. Every launch meant something culturally and politically, not just scientifically. So Mercury wasn't just a lab program. It was a declaration that Americans were not going to sit on the sidelines of the space age. But Mercury alone was not enough to get to the moon. Not even close. If Mercury answered, can a person go up there, then Gemini had to answer the much harder question. Can we learn the skills needed to go somewhere besides Earth orbit? Which leads us into the Gemini program. And this is where the story gets really interesting because Gemini doesn't get nearly enough love from the average person. Apollo gets all the glory. We're going to get into that more on the other side of the break, though, because we do need to take one. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Y'all people are weird. Y'all people are just weird. All right, so we're going to take a quick music break. We'll be right back. Hang on.
They say only real if somebody remembers. They say your legacy is only real if they can point and say that's him. If the room goes quiet when I walk in, if my shadow's longer than my sin, numbers climbing, names on screens, always craving accolades and needing to be seen. If they don't see me, I don't matter. If I'm not winning, what's the use? I gotta leave something carved in stone, something louder than the truth I know. 'Cause silence feels too close to death, and being forgotten scares me most. The world says it only matters if they see me, if they know my name. If I'm up in lights, I gotta burn it in so they remember. Before the darker night claims the light, I gotta make a mark. Before the lights go dark, yeah, I gotta make a mark. Before the lights go dark. Say my name, don't let me fade away. I watch the faithful go unnoticed, hands so dirty from the work they never chased. Recognition, always walking in faith. Every prayer said in the shadows, every choice nobody praised. They weren't building monuments to fame, just kneeling to pray. Even when it was tough to stay, I felt the weight of what I wanted and the cost of what it took. I was chasing something empty while the answer overlooked. The world says it only matters if they see me, if they know my name. If I'm up in light, gotta burn it in so they remember. Before the darker night claims the light, I gotta make a mark. Before the lights go God alone knows. I chase a crowd just to feel complete. I measure worth by clout, by those surrounding me. But there's only one name that matters, and I laid mine down to claim it. All these years I tried to leave a legacy when I was called to carry his name. The only thing worth leaving behind is a life that pointed back to him. Not my glory, not my fire, just faith that held when the whole world dimmed. It shouldn't matter if they knew my name. My life should be the proof of his glory. What matters is what they saw in me when the world was watching. Now I live my life. It never mattered if they saw me or if they ever knew my name. If they saw Jesus in my walk each day, then I ran my race the right way. Let the lights fade, let the noise fall. Heaven knows the choice I made. I don't need my name in the spotlight if they saw Jesus in my walk each day. If they saw Jesus in my walk each day. If heaven knows my name, that's enough of name. That's enough of me.
All right, and welcome back into the final segment of the Wednesday edition of the Rick Robinson Show, and we are live. Want to give a quick shout out to BZ, who I just saw step into the chat. Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday, except for the dude asking weird questions. Yeah, I don't really want to know what your grooming habits are, my friend. That's not what this show is about. All right, so before we went to the break, we started getting into Gemini and why it was kind of the redheaded stepchild of our space program as we kind of do a deep dive getting us ready for the Artemis launch tonight, just because I decided I didn't want to talk politics for the entire 2 hours today, because anyway, so of course, this is where and as I said before we went to the break, this is where the story gets really interesting, because Gemini doesn't get nearly enough love from the average person, because they didn't really know much about it, because Apollo got all the glory. Mercury gets the pioneering romance. Gemini gets treated like the middle child. Kind of because it was, though, but it's also where a lot of the yeoman's work was done, which is another reason why Gemini kind of just being shoved in the middle. Yeah, it's kind of like an Oreo. And nobody talks about the cream in the middle of the Oreo as much as they talk about the cookies. To me, the cream makes the cookies. I know I'm kind of weird in that instance because I know other folks that are like, I only really eat them because of the wafers. Yeah, anyway. Sure, but anyway. But part of this that happened in the way that it did is because of NASA's own description about Gemini was rather blunt. It was designed to test the equipment and mission procedures needed for Apollo in Earth orbit. That means spacewalks, long-duration flight, orbital rendezvous, and docking techniques. In other words, Gemini is where America learned how to actually work in space. That's a big distinction. It's one thing to survive a mission. It's another thing to be able to operate during one. Mercury was proving that man could, in fact, go to space and could endure there. Gemini was building the muscle memory of spaceflight. How do you maneuver? How do you line up with another object moving at enormous speed? How do you leave the capsule and come back in? How do you stay up long enough to make a lunar mission realistic? All of that matters because the moon was never going to be reached by bravery alone. It required process. It required repetition. It required procedures. It required a sort of disciplined choreography. And this is one of the great lessons of exploration history in general. The glamour gets remembered, but the tedious mastery is what makes the glamour possible. Gemini was the tedious mastery. It is the part where the nation learned that heroism without competence is useless. Hey, maybe that should be a callback to why SFA failed miserably. Because there's lots of flashiness, lots of heroism, but everybody seems completely incompetent. Maybe that should be a lesson truck riders take into the future. And once Mercury and Gemini had done their jobs, the country was ready for the giant leap people still talk about all these decades later, otherwise known as the Apollo missions. So this was the high water mark of our space program. Apollo remains one of the most audacious things the United States has ever done, period, full stop. NASA says Apollo 11 was the mission intended to fulfill President Kennedy's 1961 national goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969, landed on the moon on July 20th, and returned to Earth on July 24th. Now everybody knows the broad outline. Saturn V, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, one small step, flag on the moon, the world watching. But the reason Apollo still has this almost mythical force is that it was a fusion of vision and execution at a level very few societies ever managed to pull off. Think about the chain of effort involved here. It involves political will, industrial output, academic research, computing advances, material sciences, guidance systems, test pilots, mission planners, thousands upon thousands of people, most of whom the public never knew, all pushing in one direction. And the crazy thing is, we did it in less than a decade from Kennedy's challenge. That is astonishing even by today's standards. And it happened because the country had clarity. Not perfect unity, because nothing is ever perfect, but it did have clarity. And I think that's part of what we're missing today is clarity of purpose. And we need to find a way to get back to that again. There was a target, there was urgency, there was a reason, there was money, there was prestige, there was national commitment. And yes, the Cold War was a major reason for that commitment. We can't really pretend otherwise, as much as some of us might like to. Apollo was scientific, Apollo was exploratory, Apollo was inspirational, but Apollo was also geopolitical theater backed by incredible real achievement. That doesn't diminish it. It actually makes it more impressive if you're willing to look under the hood and behind the curtain, because the system took a strategic rivalry and turned it into one of the greatest engineering accomplishments in human history. Now, here's the uncomfortable question. If we could do that then, why didn't we just keep going? Why didn't missions to the moon become routine? Why is there not already a base on the moon? Why haven't we built cities up there by the 80s, like science fiction often promised of the time? Why did the most spectacular chapter end so quickly? And the answer is because once the immediate political objective was achieved, the appetite changed. That's the white paper reason. I still think there's another one, but again, I'm not turning this episode into an episode of juxtaposition. You can find, Amish and I have done a couple of different deep dives on the moon, including the reasons why we believe we never went back, so you're welcome to check those out later. The moon had been won, technically speaking. In the Cold War imagination, the symbolic payoff began to diminish. The cost remained enormous. Public attention shifted. National priorities shifted. So America did not quit space, but it did change the kind of space story it wanted to tell. And I also think part of that was because a lot of our science was still really early and fledgling. Now that we're understanding that there is actually water on Mars and there is actually water under the lunar surface, we're realizing how much easier it would be to do the things that we once thought were impossible. Including, think about this for a second. Even if we don't start building bigger ships in space, imagine how much easier it would be to get a ship launched from the moon. If it's for larger exploration, it needs to be a bigger ship. Imagine how much easier that stuff would be. So I think we're finally starting to look at this from a very scientific perspective, because now we're finding other reasons to support our need to be there, especially if we do want to become an interplanetary species. And by all accounts, we do, because it has enthralled us and been a big part of our imagination for as long as we have existed. All right, so after Apollo, the American space program turned toward a different model. Instead of a massive singular push to the moon, the focus moved towards reusable access to orbit and a more sustained operational presence closer to Earth. Now, this is where the other side of the conspiracy theories comes in, because a lot of folks believe that the moon landings didn't happen because they couldn't, because of that Van Allen radiation belt that we discussed earlier. I know enough about it that I do find it interesting that in recent documentaries that I've been watching as recently as the last few years, there are NASA scientists admitting that they have conquered the Van Allen radiation belt in some of these more modern rockets. But my problem with that becomes, I thought we topped that hill in the 60s. So their word choices were interesting to me. And this is, again, something that Amish and I have talked about on juxtaposition, because the word usage that they're using kind of lends credence to the idea that we may not have actually gone to the moon, that this may have happened on a soundstage. I don't personally believe that. But when you have scientists in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, all saying the same things of, we have finally figured out how to get around the Van Allen belt. Finally? Didn't we do that 50 years ago? Anyway. But so this is where we get into the space shuttle. And the space shuttle was imagined to be something much more than it became, because the plan was eventually they thought they would get the technology working to where we could basically just do vertical takeoff and landing from the ground to space and back again. And we never really got there. But the space shuttle did do a lot of interesting things. So NASA says the shuttle fleet flew 135 missions between April 12th, 1981 and July 21st, 2011. It deployed satellites, supported science missions, serviced Hubble, and played a huge role in assembly of the International Space Station. Now, the shuttle era is complicated because on one hand, it was amazing. The orbiter looked like the future. It made spaceflight visible again. It created a sense that space was becoming a working environment and not just a destination. And that matters because the shuttle normalized a certain kind of space activity, but it also trained Americans to think smaller in one sense. Not less important, but in fact smaller. Apollo was transcendent. Shuttle was operational. Apollo said, "We're crossing the abyss." Shuttle said, "We are maintaining capability." And those are not the same thing. The shuttle was enormously useful. It was also risky, as tragedy painfully reminded us more than once. But culturally, it marked the shift from grand outward push to low Earth orbit infrastructure and utilization, and that trend continued with the International Space Station. NASA says the ISS has been continuously occupied since November of 2000, making it the long-running symbol of international cooperation and long-duration habitation in orbit. The ISS is one of those achievements people underrate because it is so persistent. It doesn't have the clean, dramatic arc of a moon landing. It doesn't give you a single iconic blueprint moment, but it represents something else: endurance. We learned how to live off of Earth for long stretches. We learned how to cooperate with other nations in orbit. We learned how to conduct ongoing research in microgravity. We built habitats of presence. That is not a small thing, but again, it was presence near Earth. That was the pattern. For decades, America remained in space, but not on the old exploratory trajectory of Apollo. And while humans stayed relatively close to home, our machines kept going further and further. Which leads us to the next part of the story, the robotic age. Because we never really stopped exploring, we just changed how it was done. So one of the biggest mistakes people make when they talk about the post-Apollo decline is assuming space exploration just went quiet. It didn't. But again, before I go too much further into this, this is going to lean into the idea for a lot of conspiracy theorists that we can't survive the Van Allen belt radiation. So everything they've told us about leaving low Earth orbit was manufactured and propaganda because we had to beat the Soviets. But unfortunately, this does actually kind of lend the credence to that because all of our deep space exploration has been robotic. And you actually kind of start having to ask yourself why. But robotic exploration, astronomy, planetary science, that world exploded. As an example, take Voyager 1. NASA says Voyager 1, launched in 1977, conducted its primary encounters with Jupiter and Saturn and entered interstellar space in 2012. It remains the most distant human-made object in our current history. That is extraordinary. Think about the symbolism of that. A machine built by human beings in the 70s is still out there, still carrying a trace of us farther than any astronaut has ever gone. Then there's the Hubble telescope, which launched in 1990, which NASA says transformed our understanding of the universe, and they're right. Hubble didn't just gather data, it changed how the public imagined the cosmos. Those images mattered. They were scientific, yes, but they were also emotional. They created visceral responses in everyone that saw them. They gave people a visual relationship with deep space that very few instruments ever have. And now, in our own era, you have James Webb, launched in 2021, now serving as NASA's flagship observatory for the early universe, galaxy formation, and the study of exoplanet atmospheres and other deep space questions. So even during the long absence of lunar missions, America and its partners never stopped reaching outward intellectually. We just did it with machines more than with crews. And there's something humbling in that, because the robots don't get ticker tape parades. They don't give interviews. They don't become celebrity astronauts. But they do extend our senses. They are our proxies, and they let us touch what we cannot yet touch ourselves. So if you're telling the real history of space exploration, you can't reduce the post-Apollo era to disappointment. I'll be honest, to me, it was a bit of a disappointment, but I do get the point where this is going, because it really wasn't disappointment as much as redirection. But to a lot of us that, like I said, grew up watching things like Lost in Space, Star Trek, and even the Jetsons to a lesser extent, we're expecting the future to be a lot different than it is today. So, but there was, I guess, less of a disappointment, more of a redirection, because we still did things that led to different kinds of greatness. For many people, though, a lot of something was still missing. The human drama, the physical risk, the visible frontier spirit, the sense of us going, not just our instruments. And that's one of the things, even, from Enterprise, when they're wanting to go to what eventually they started calling M-class planets, because it was based on Vulcan maps of the time. The Vulcan word for, I guess, habitable like us was Minshara class. And there were a couple times that T'Pol and Archer nearly came to blows on the bridge. I mean, not really, but as close as you could get in the TV world. Because she kept saying, well, we could just send a probe. And he's like, well, if Earth wanted probes, they could have sent probes. They sent us. And I think that, to me, has always been the spirit of space exploration, and why even though, I don't want to necessarily say that the era of the shuttle and everything that came after was a major disappointment, because there were a lot of cool things that happened. Hell, I was part of a junior high team that got to go all over the eastern seaboard and set up the satellite dish for kids that didn't have access to satellites to be able to watch the launches. And I did that for my entire 9th grade year. But, now that we're getting back into this whole manned exploration phase, which again is predominantly because there has been as much as I hate this word, this set of words, a private-public partnership between the government and corporations that have kind of spurred us back into this direction. But this is exactly why Artemis feels different. Artemis is interesting because it's trying to reconnect two traditions: the old tradition of human exploration beyond low Earth orbit, and the newer tradition of long-term systems building, partnerships, and sustainable capability. NASA presents Artemis 2 as the next step after the uncrewed Artemis 1 test, with the broader Artemis campaign aimed at establishing the capabilities needed for future lunar surface missions and eventually the longer horizon of Mars. That is an important distinction from Apollo. Apollo was in many ways a sprint. Beat the Soviets, land on the moon, demonstrate our supremacy. Artemis is being sold as a campaign, or using the same analogy, a marathon, if you will. Build a rocket, prove the capsule, test the crew, return to lunar space, develop sustained operations, use the moon as a proving ground for deeper missions. Now, whether that full vision unfolds exactly as advertised is going to be another question. Space policy is always vulnerable to budgets, administrations, priorities, delays, and the eternal human talent for overpromising. But at the level of stated ambition, Artemis is not just let's repeat Apollo for nostalgia. NASA's framing is much more about enduring architecture than symbolic victory. And there's another modern twist here, too. The broader American space ecosystem is not what it was in 1969. NASA's Commercial Crew Program helped restore U.S. crew launch capability to low Earth orbit through a public-private model, which means the American space effort now exists in a more blended government-commercial environment than the one that produced Apollo. So Artemis sits at this intersection of old-school national ambition and newer partnership models. That's one reason it feels both familiar and new. It has the mythology of the old frontier and the managerial complexity of the modern state. And that may be the real test, not just whether the rocket fires, but whether the nation can sustain a program like this long enough for it to become more than a headline, because America has launched magnificent things before. The question is whether America can stay committed long enough to build the next phase of human exploration. And since a lot of our younger folks seem to have the attention span of a goldfish and the memory of a gnat, I don't really know. But let's bring things back to tonight as we get ready to close out the show. If Artemis 2 launches and flies successfully, what does that actually mean? First, it means the hardware and mission design have cleared the most important threshold yet. A crewed deep space test around the moon. NASA identifies Artemis 2 as the mission to demonstrate the capabilities needed for human deep space operations. Second, it means the half-a-century gap is no longer just an historical fact. It becomes a completed pause. Reuters actually noted the significance plainly is this is the first crewed lunar mission in more than 50 years. Third, and maybe most importantly, it would mean the national imagination gets a jolt. And don't underestimate that. A civilization needs horizon stories. A civilization needs imagination. And in a lot of ways, we still have a lot of imaginings going on. We just turn them inward. And I've noticed when our imagination is turned inward rather than outward, we become very destructive. We need a focal point for imagination. Not only one that can bring us together, but can turn that imagination that we need, that we crave, that is part of who we are, that we can turn it back outward again. So we stop reimagining the idea that there's 11 billion genders and things like that. But again, it needs a civilization needs things that point beyond the petty and the immediate. Look, I'm not naive. Space programs cost money. Politics infects everything that it touches. Hell, that's mostly how I make my money. Bureaucracies bloat. Contractors oversell. Delays happen. Real questions about priorities always exist. Fine, all of that can be true, but it can also be true that exploration at this level says something important about a people. It says they still believe there are frontiers worth crossing. It says they still think the future is something to build rather than merely inherit. It says that they still produce engineers, pilots, and planners, along with dreamers willing to stake years of effort on goals that do not pay off overnight. That matters because civilizations that stop looking outward usually start folding inward. Folding inward is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is exhaustion. Artemis 2, at least symbolically, pushes the other direction. It says maybe we're not exhausted quite yet. Maybe we're still capable of doing things at scale. Maybe we're still willing to try. Maybe we're still willing to do hard things that don't fit in a single election cycle. And frankly, I think we need a lot more of that. So tonight, as we all hopefully settle in to watch the launch of Artemis 2 as it prepares to go, I think the right way to see it is not as an isolated event, but as the newest sentence in a very long American story. A story that began in a Cold War panic after Sputnik. A story that learned human spaceflight through Mercury and operational discipline through Gemini. A story that reached its mythic peak with Apollo. A story that then shifted into shuttle station building and robotic exploration on an astonishing scale. And now, maybe a story that is ready to step back into deep space with human beings aboard. That's why Artemis 2 matters. Not because it solves everything, not because it guarantees a permanent lunar future, not because every promise attached to it will automatically come true. It matters because it is a movement. It is something that can live beyond a moment. After a very long pause, it is movement back towards exploration with human hands again. And sometimes history turns not on the finish line, but on the moment a nation decides to start walking again. That's what this launch feels like. And ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much going to be the end of the program today. But as we get ready to close things out, just a reminder, if you haven't been checking out X lately, you need to be, because the whole American-Japanese love fest is kind of amazing. I will admit, even I didn't see exactly how much that joke was going to liberate the Japanese people. I didn't get a lot of the takes of other folks, only because I do have some experience with their culture from, studying other people's histories. And I knew from the look on the prime minister's face and who she was fixing her gaze upon that she wasn't angry with Trump. She was mad at the reporter for even asking the question. But I also think that even she didn't realize how viral that moment was going to go and how freeing it was for her entire people, because they're saying this all over social media. We have been living with an 80-year shame, and we didn't know what to do with it. Trump broke the tension of it by making a joke about it, and now we feel like it's okay to put all that baggage down. And since then, now Americans are bonding over our love with Japanese folks of big trucks, barbecue, goth Japanese chicks, and as a fairly newly single guy, all I can say about that is, oh my God. Anyway, I say newly single, but hell, I haven't been in a relationship of any kind in like 6 years, but it still feels new to me. But yeah, Japanese goth chicks. That could be a subgenre I can get into. All right. So again, Artemis 2 is not the ending. It is the question. After 50 years, do we still mean it when we say we want to go further? And I think that's where we're going to leave it, because tonight is where we find out, do we still want to go farther? My name is Rick Robinson. This has been my show, and we will be back later tonight with mostly me pushing buttons. First, I believe this is an inquiry night because I was out sick last week and I was going to have to take over 2 hours worth of time. And with a wrenched back and barely being able to sit in my chair, I was like, no, not doing that. So we took the night off since almost everybody was off anyway. And then after inquiry, there should be a conservative curmudgeon, followed by Behind Enemy Lines, which we may or may not break into programming at some point to cover the Artemis launch, depending on when it actually happens. And after that, we'll do Rick and Orty, and then we'll finish things off with Behind Enemy Lines with Sean Lewis. And if I'm feeling up to it, we may actually do a double shot tonight and make up for Monday, because I had all kinds of issues going on Monday night. Didn't run a show then, so I owe him one. But we will see. All right, we're going to get out of here. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Wednesday. For those of you working for the weekend, you are, in fact, nearly there. So you've at least made it to the top of the hill. It's all downhill from here. I'll see you later tonight, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I'll see you on Friday for the usual. So this show, the Weekend News Roundup, and He Said, She Said, live on KLRN Radio. Bye, everybody. Say goodnight, Gracie.